Hi, this is Dr. Anya and I'm teaching online here at Mercer University. I am teaching online because we have a coronavirus outbreak and it's a worldwide pandemic. So I hope you'll stay home and learn with me. I am right now teaching social media marketing and marketing analytics. And the tough part is that usually these classes are now taught face-to-face but have been moved to an online setting due to social distancing and coronavirus pandemic. So I decided, like I said in my previous message, that I decided to not only record these videos for my students, but also make some of them available to general public on the YouTube channel. I decided to do that so hopefully it will help small businesses, other businesses to address this, serious crisis that evolved worldwide and that has become a threat to well-being of human beings and well-being of many businesses. My students are very giving, so I'm sure they don't mind if I share some of these videos with you. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to today address the idea of crisis and crisis preparation. What is it? How should we address it? And the importance of addressing it relatively quickly, and what role social media can play in addressing crisis and building relationship with customers. Okay, so what is the definition of crisis? And I have here a little cheat sheet to make sure that I stay focused, because if you take my classes, I like to talk, and we usually have a good conversations, and now I want to make sure that I don't digress. So what is crisis? So crisis is defined as a significant threat to operations that have negative consequences if not handled properly. Why do we even consider coronavirus a threat? Well, first of all, natural disasters, it's an unexpected occurrence, and it can have major negative consequences to your business. Those negative consequences typically involve one or combination of the following, and that includes public safety. So it's a threat. Crisis can be a threat to public safety, to you become at risk for financial loss, and finally reputation loss. So 3. Fourth one is also often added when it comes to human health. Sometimes lives are lost. So in some organizations, businesses, especially in sort of production or in building, engineering, there's a threat for life loss, and that would be the fourth one. So, like I said, public safety, financial loss, and reputation loss. If not handled correctly, you can lose all of these. So, or threaten all of these aspects. So with coronavirus, it's definitely a public safety matter, and that is why we are being asked to distance ourselves. Some states have been put on shelter in place where people cannot move unless it's essential. This will unfortunately and has already proven to lead to financial loss, and not only nationwide as a government, but small businesses. The biggest threat right now to small businesses is cash flow. And finally, reputation loss. Now, you may think, why is coronavirus affecting reputation of any business? It will. First of all, if you don't handle this crisis properly and maybe endanger your customers or your employees, that is going to be a major threat to your reputation. If you put your business first and therefore threaten the well-being of your employees and your customers because maybe you're greedy, then you obviously, the public will remember, and this will negatively affect your reputation. Okay, so now that we know there are many definitions of crisis, but this generic definition, so the definition that I'm going to use again is a significant threat to operation that can have negative consequences if not handled properly. And then a crisis can create 3 related threats: public safety, financial loss, reputation loss. Okay, so we can say there are 5 types of crisis, but 2 generic ones would be slow evolving crisis and smoldering crisis, so an abrupt occurrence that is hard to predict. With a slow evolving crisis, there are usually signs of crisis that is about to evolve. So perhaps if it's employee related crisis, so your employee is doing something bad, then you may see some signs. So for example, one of those, a really good example, it's not good, but it's actually a pretty sad example, but a real example is Penn State in the Sandusky case, whereas he molested numerous boys during his time as a coach at Penn State, and there was evidence that the university knew about this one way or another. They should have found out. There were warning signs, but they haven't addressed it. They've done literally nothing, which led to the negative consequences, loss of reputation. First of all, more victims, right? They haven't done anything, so there were more and more victims. They could have stopped the case right there, where there were some signs and they became aware of some signs of evolving crisis. They have done nothing. So it caused them to lose. There was threat to public safety, young individuals. There was financial loss because they had to pay back and they had to, make significant changes, bowl game losses, and so on. Finally, reputation, negative consequences to reputation. So this was a slow evolving crisis, and everybody should have expected this eventually to emerge. Everybody at that organization should have expected it to emerge. Now, the other types of crisis is sort of abrupt, like smoldering crisis is an abrupt crisis. Nobody expected. There are no signs of it hitting. So some natural disasters can be crisis like this, simply things that are very hard to predict. Now with coronavirus, we can argue, right? There were some earlier signs, in December and January, I would say. So there are some signs that it is a very tough virus in sense that it spreads and it's pretty lethal. But because I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not going to get into that. It's not my area of expertise. But there were some signs that there's a threat coming. But most businesses were really caught off guard when it comes to severity of it. Okay, so before I get to how you could manage something like this, I want to talk about 3 phases of crisis management, right? It's a pre-crisis, crisis response, and post-crisis. So in pre-crisis, we want to focus on 2 things. Pre-crisis focuses on 2 things, right? Preparation and prevention, or prevention and preparation. Prevention usually is, looking for signs, making sure that you're alert to potential signs of crisis evolving, and you want to stop it before it sort of spirals out of control, right? You may also want to have protocols in place in how to prevent crisis or spot crisis. Then 2, when it comes to preparation, you want to make sure you have your crisis management team in place who are skilled in how to respond. You have all the protocols on response to crisis. You may want to pre-draft certain responses to different types of crisis, right? Maybe employee-related crisis, natural disaster crisis, economic crisis. There are different types of crisis that you could sort of prepare yourself for and pre-draft communication messages. And finally, you want to decide on who was going to be the spokesperson. You want to choose one or two people, ideally probably one, who is going to be the go-to individual that press can contact for comments and so on. And this person should be available and sort of have his or her ducks in a row, right? And be able to speak on the topic. What else? You want to decide on communication channels, whether it's media, contacting media. You definitely want to have good relationship with media to ensure that you have somebody to contact and they will listen. So you want to build that relationship in your pre-crisis phase when you plan for potential crisis as part of your relationship with stakeholders. Building relationship with stakeholders. Media is just one of those groups that you want to have develop relationships, and they will listen in crisis if you have developed relationship with them. Media, I said email. You want to have just like you do email campaign, which we'll get to a little later in the semester. You want to have your contacts and be able to reach out to them via email. Website, you want to have statements on your website. And finally, social media. Social media, since you have followers, you will be able to reach them basically instantly. Interestingly enough, we probably scroll through our social media more often than we check our email, especially the younger population. So that's preparation for your crisis. So what happens when the crisis happens? So the second phase of crisis management is when actually crisis happens or evolves, it spirals sort of out of control. First of all, you want to draft a response within an hour. So where would that be with coronavirus? It's at this point really hard to tell. We could backtrack in media when it really evolved and you could have dropped hints, or just waited till maybe it has become a pandemic. I would probably have drafted something a little earlier than that. But again, this is part of your pre-crisis preparation in terms of when you want to address those things. I would say if people are starting to draft their messages now, it's probably on the late side. Not probably, certainly is on the light side. So right now is March 21st. It's midnight. I'm not sure. It's after midnight. I think it's March 22nd actually now, 2020. So we're mid of pandemic. So right now I would say if businesses haven't drafted any message, they're really late on the ball. You want to have, so like I said, your initial response, if it's a sudden crisis, you would want to do it within an hour. Before this first hour, before you actually, so maybe not coronavirus, but when it's employee related, or maybe if you're a gasoline company, you had a major leak. Major leak, and within the first hour, or maybe another thing, employee got hurt. So within this first hour, this first hour window, you want to make sure you collect all the data that you need to have, because your initial response has to be truthful, has to be honest, and fairly detailed, right? Of course, it's sometimes very hard to collect data within an hour, but you definitely need to give out some sort of response within the first hour of usually smoldering crisis, right? Or when it hits the fan. So collect your data as much as possible and provide initial response. So that's the most important part of responding to crisis. This is why it's important to pre-plan for crisis, have your team in place that is ready to respond, your spokesperson ready to respond, and the team that is ready to collect data and choose the correct response. Which is why pre-drafting for different scenarios, pre-drafting communication for different scenarios is very useful, because at least you're starting off with a template. And then you want to make sure that you are contacting the right stakeholders, so the media, your customers via email and social media. Please, 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 I cannot stress this enough. If you have a conference, do not ever use no comment. No comment is one of the worst things you can say, because usually no comment is considered sort of admission to guilt. So try to at least sort of answer without attacking media individuals for daring to ask questions. So there are other things I want to cover as far as crisis goes, but this is probably good enough for the first lecture to not overwhelm you with the amount of information I provide you with within each segment, so to speak. So let's review. Okay, so what is crisis? Crisis is defined as a significant threat to operation that can have negative consequences if not handled correctly. Truth is, most organizations will at some point be exposed to crisis or have some sort of crisis, live through crisis sooner or later. So preparation is key. A crisis can create 3 related threats: public safety, financial loss, reputation loss. Can be one or combination of all, or 2. Then in crisis management, we have 3 phases: pre-crisis, then crisis. I mentioned about crisis, the importance of drafting quick response via correct channels, leaving the no comment at home, and finally the last one that I actually didn't yet talk about, but we will talk about extensively, is post-crisis. Post-crisis usually involves coming back to work, right? Returning to regular business. And during that phase, if it's something, if you lost reputation, if the threat was reputational loss, this is the time when you rebuild reputation. With coronavirus, unless you put your employees and customers knowingly at risk by continuing business, if there was, for example, a case and everybody got exposed to somebody with coronavirus, and yet instead of quarantining, putting in quarantine employees that maybe have contracted and been exposed to those contracted with coronavirus, and you made them work, then it's a problem, right? Then it would have been major reputational loss. And so you would have to rebuild it in your post-crisis sort of behaviors, okay? So pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis. In terms of coronavirus, if you've done nothing really wrong, your post-crisis communication will really evolve, sort of coming back to work, continuing doing your business, right? Now, there are some interesting things you could be doing during crisis, because we have to plan for the future, and crisis will be a good time to connect with your employees, show your human side, be the human behind the business. So I think, I'm certain that a lot of it will kind of show up in our other lectures, and I'll give you tips in how to behave during crisis like this one, that once it's over, you can much smoothly come back to your day-to-day business. All right, that's it for now, and we'll be back next time, and I hope it was helpful. I hope it was useful. Make sure you take some notes so that you are able to recall that information later. Until next time, stay safe. Bye bye.